Morning, or I guess it's evening, afternoon. This is a special edition at noon, talking with Lilian Chen. How are you?
I'm doing well. A little
What?
bit nervous, to be honest. This is my first live, so I'm super excited to be doing this. Hopefully, we'll talk about some fun things about real estate today.
I think so. You'll be just fine. It's like we're grabbing lunch or having a cup of coffee. Except I'll start with an introduction. So for those that don't know, Lilian Chen is a former commercial real estate analyst, a current digital nomad. She's frequently insightful and an occasional urbanist, but an all-around delightful person. And every time we've talked or interacted, she's the founder and CEO of Proptimal, a tech-enabled real estate analytics tool that provides commercial real estate investors with financial models and pitch decks. Have I missed anything?
Yes, and now we're building the real estate analyst in the software.
Wonderful. So I think that's a great place to start, and that's part of the reason why we connected is the intersection of technology and real estate has gotten a lot of attention, but not a lot of traction. What is it that you're doing right now that is really creating what I think is a very useful tool that will accelerate people's ability to both analyze and uh, build concepts out of real estate deals.
Yeah, so I think this question is two parts, right? The first part is how come real estate seems to be this impenetrable market that none of the tech people can manage to succeed in? And then the second part is about what I'm building now and what it's all about. So let's talk about the first one, right? I think the commercial real estate market is a very, very special market with its own quirks, with its own people and how they work and function, right? So I think a lot of the technologists that come in, they sometimes have this misguided approach to commercial real estate where they look at the market first of all and they say, okay, well, this everything is outdated. Why are you not using the technology? Let me just solve this problem in a logical way, and then here's the solution, right? How hard can it be? And then turns out it's a lot harder than it is because they didn't realize, for example, most of the real estate people don't even sit in front of their laptop, right? You're out there, you're on sites, you're driving, you're talking to clients, and then so they don't understand the cultural perspective and intricacies of how people act, and therefore their logical software doesn't work in real estate. And this is by no means a fault to real estate people, right? People always have this preconception that commercial real estate people are just really bad with technology and they're too scared to try new things. I think that's the opposite of what I've been seeing. I think all of the developers that I've been talking to, they're super fascinated by the technology that's on the market. They all each have their own tech stack and they're really savvy about what they use. So that I think is the reason is just there's a mismatch between the amount of people who understand both technology and real estate. That's really hard to find.
I totally agree, and as you're saying that, I'm thinking to myself the other thing I think you run into from a technology standpoint, and I spent a lot of my career in software sales and business development is
Yeah.
it's really easy to get your customer wrong, and by that I mean, you might assume that your customer is commercial real estate as a whole
Mhm.
big bubble, but the reality is that you might want to target somebody in development, which is a totally different customer from asset management, which is
Yeah.
a totally different customer from the investment analyst, which is a totally different customer from an owner investor and or a property manager. And so and that's really boiling the ocean to try to do all of those things. And so what you're solving a very specific problem. Tell me more about that.
Yeah, so I am building a software currently. The first thing is a software that allows anyone to build a financial model in just minutes and without writing a single formula, right? So the value proposition here is I've been an analyst, and I gotta admit, in my first 2 years of analyst career, I had a huge learning curve where I had to learn how to model. And if anyone here has actually tried to learn how to model before, you know it's really hard to learn. it's really hard to design something that is nice and usable without it breaking all the time, right? So I remember my first 3 to 6 months of my job. It was just every day seeing a page of refs and then freaking out and asking my associate for help and staying late in the office and just I couldn't get this formula to work and getting super frustrated and worked up about it. So it's crazy that we depend on Excel and therefore the entire industry runs on Excel, but there's no scalable way to do this. And the thing is, any good analyst, the moment they become good at doing Excel, they're going to want a promotion. So now you have to find somebody else who just graduated from college and then train them all over again and start the cycle all over again. So what I really hope by doing this is, look, I'm not trying to replace Excel. I'm trying to give people a more efficient way to do things, and then the software will generate a dynamic Excel for them on top of which they can continue to build on top of, instead of just saying, "Hey, you want to underwrite a deal? Here's my software. I'm going to do all the math, and I'm going to show you none of the math, and all you're getting is an export that you can't really use." So that's what I'm.
Yeah. Well, and I thought one of the other things that was so critical, even to my experience, that you are solving for is version tracking.
Yeah,
And so that everybody who's looking at this Excel is obviously looking at the same one. We're
yeah,
not digging through stacks of emails. Whenever you go through a closing, you might have 100 emails with responses and replies, and so tracking those documents and forms, or even just the most updated template, is can be difficult. And then, especially, that's also why if you use something like Google Sheets, then you're kind of in a whole other world of hurt, because you have how many people unknown making and breaking changes to those forms as well. So I think what you're doing is wonderful. What is the difference in the feedback you're getting from American developers, international developers? Which reminds me, from where in the world are you talking to us right now?
yeah. So I have an international background. Actually, all of my work has been currently focused on just America. So I talk to American developers. They actually are quite different from European developers and European people in finance, and VCs in America are completely different from VCs in Europe as well. And then, so personal background, I've lived across 3 countries, gone to more than 30 countries as a part of my digital nomad journey. And I think being able to learn about different backgrounds and understand how different people think has helped me develop the skill to understand, like you said, all the different people in real estate and how each of them think, and finding the common ground for all of them.
Yeah. Is there any, I'll say, like European math that gets done differently in real estate development than you would find in an American city or an American developer, or some other international example where the
Yeah.
calculation might be different, or the way that they're measuring return on investment might be different than what we would expect in the more American model in real estate development?
I would say I'll give an example, right? So I've worked a couple of internships in UK when I was doing my studies. Uh, UK has more ground lease than in the US,
Yeah.
right? So it's very interesting because when you're in Europe, you have all these systems that have existed for hundreds of years, and then they get passed down over and over, and you still see the remnants of that. In the US, you do whatever you want, right? So if
Right.
you're in a state like California, where I'm from, of course, it's going to be a little bit stricter. But if you're in Texas, do whatever. If you're in Vegas, I think I saw, was it Property Brothers or somebody? They had a slide coming from the second floor of their house into into
Yeah.
the pool. You can do whatever you want. It's amazing. And I think American returns tend to be better as well. It's really hard to find property that cash flows as well in Europe than in the US. And in Europe as well, I found that in places like Switzerland, they used to have negative interest rate, but now my partner is in Switzerland. Um, their returns are so low that they barely have any cash flow. I think a lot of it is just focused on asset value protection. But
Yeah.
I can't say that I'm an expert on Europe. It's just what I've seen so far.
Sure. That's so fascinating too, because one of the other reasons why we got connected was your occasional urbanism, which is
Yes.
always so insightful, particularly in places like Seattle, right? Um, what are you seeing any correlation as you talk to developers or you look at models or as you look at things between your experience traveling abroad and being in Europe now? I think you're in Europe now,
Mm.
and America on the impact of urbanism and the densification of neighborhoods on either the incentives to develop or the complications or the balance therein.
Yeah. So I think to clarify your question, you're asking how is it like between developing in Europe versus developing in America? Is that what you're
From
asking?
in the urban context, so I'll be more clear. Sorry for not being
Yeah.
more clear myself. So, when you look at European neighborhoods that have the
Mm.
what Americans would consider urbanism, as opposed to our suburban environments, do you
Mm.
see similar investment theses in somewhere like Barcelona as you might in an emerging urbanist environment like Seattle? Or
Oh.
is the transit networks and other neighborhood aspects in Europe so different that we can't really draw much of a correlation?
You know what? I think you bring up a really interesting point about transit, right? And I think having lived in both the US and Europe, transit really determines how a city is built. And also this applies to Asia as well, right? So I grew up in Taiwan, and in Asia and Europe, the commonality between these two places is that they have very limited space. So you basically have to build a city within a very small amount of square footage, and you need to house a lot of people there, and everyone needs to be able to get from point A and point B without running into each other all the time, right? So if you look into cities like Taipei and Japan and London or Paris, they have very, very sophisticated public transit systems, right? You have the metro. I would say in America, the only close well, New York would be a very close one. I think Chicago also has a pretty good transit system.
Mhm.
Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, the BART system is also pretty good. But man, as long as you get to some of the different cities, if you can afford a car and you tell people you take the transit, people almost look at you like you're crazy, right? So I know
Yeah.
this because I used to live in Long Beach and I had to take the Metro Blue Line from Long Beach. And whenever I go to UI events, it would be in LA. So I would take the Blue Line. By the way, the Blue Line starts from Long Beach and it goes through, Lakewood, Compton, Carson, and all these, and then South LA and whatnot. So you really see all kinds of people coming in. Sometimes they're selling stuff, sometimes they're performing, and it's chaotic, right? So um, in the US, you don't really have that because you have to transport across a large distance, and it's really hard to build transit for longer distances, right? We still don't have transit between San Francisco and Los Angeles, and that is makes it harder for people to live in a small city center. Another thing that I noticed is in Europe and in Asia, you have more street level retail, right? So one of the things that I love the most about Taiwan is if you walk down the street, there are restaurants everywhere, right? You can take 2 steps and you'll have another restaurant, and take another 5 steps, you have another restaurant. Every time I go back, I'm eating nonstop. I'm eating 10 times a day, right? It's amazing.
Yeah.
And gotta go, by the way, if you like food. And then in Europe, it's kind of the same where you have a lot of retail, you have a lot of restaurants on the ground floor. Now, that does a lot to how a city feels because now you're seeing people walking on the street. Whereas in America, you don't really see people walking on the street unless they have to. And even if a Starbucks is 1 block away, you have to drive to that Starbucks, right? Unless you're in a huge city like New York. So I know in the US, the buildings aren't really zoned for places to be transit oriented and walkable, but that is what really gets people to be able to live in one place, not have a car, and be able to get around.
Yeah. One of the things I was thinking about as you were saying all that is a lot of the I'll call it the urban arrogance in America is that people should want to be in dense environments, right? So I grew up in Pasadena, and so you use the Los Angeles as an example. You know, well, at least when I was growing up, nobody was saying everybody should live in downtown LA. Everybody in LA was pretty content to not live downtown.
Yes.
Even with I remember when the Orange Line was getting built, and I've
Yeah.
done that route from Pasadena to down to Union Station and beyond, and I keep having to think to myself from an American standpoint and from a city like I'm in St. Louis right now, and we talk a lot about mass transit and how much mass transit can change a city. How
Yeah.
much of that is whether the presence of mass transit creates that urbanist opportunity, or whether the urbanist opportunity and the density that you described, right? Small area, you have to build in
Mm.
a small area,
Yeah.
creates the infrastructure and demand for mass transit. And if it's binary, right? If it's either we have a small
Yeah.
area where we have to use mass transit, or we have an option which has its own switching costs, like going out to the suburbs and not being in an urban environment, um, which one drives that? And I'm not sure I have an answer. What's your instinct?
It depends on how rich the city is, right?
Yeah. Oh yeah, yeah. I guess so. Uh,
so so if you think about it, yes, I think you should have the people to be able to justify building that infrastructure and to have the tax base to be able to build that infrastructure, because if you don't have people, you don't have money. And then so then once you build that infrastructure, then you can scale. So I would say you have to kind of do it in different tiers and switch back and forth. Now, one of the things that I really like is in different European cities, they have trams, right? And trams are these overground, like streetcars. In San
yes.
Francisco, we have
Yeah.
them as well. I think they're incredibly effective because you don't have to dig underground, right? So you are already saving a lot of money by building it on the street level. They operate relatively slowly so they don't run over
Yeah.
people all the time. And the thing is, you can cross the street still whenever you want. It doesn't disrupt the pedestrians' workflow, walkway and whatnot. And you can still get people to hop on and hop off easily, so they can do these mid distance that are a little bit too far for walking but also a little bit too close for driving. I forget what that term is, but those are perfect for a city that doesn't have a lot of budget but still want to have public transit for the majority of the people. And I think the key here is you want to keep it safe, right? And also, if you have a streetcar, then everything is pretty transparent. You can see who comes in and who goes out.
Yeah. That brings up two great points. And in the American memory, we forget that most of our major cities did have robust streetcar systems up until maybe the 30s or 40s. St.
Mm,
Louis was a streetcar city. Los Angeles was a streetcar city. Los Angeles was a notorious streetcar city. Detroit as well. I can't think of any more off the top of my head that didn't have like a subway system or something else. But to your point, what we see now, like in cities like Kansas City, Cincinnati, um, Miami has a streetcar, like these cities that have brought back a streetcar, if only down a central corridor for those mid-length trips, are
mm,
seeing tremendous revival. Much more so than on something like a light rail that's trying to get you 60 miles.
yeah.
And I think so the question leading up to that is there's two things I'd love to hear your opinion on. One is that I think the streetcar answers a lot of questions, in particular, the generational difference between maybe the car centric baby boomers in the United
Mhm.
States and the let's say transit curious millennials and younger who I don't know that I'm trading my car for an electric car for a long distance trip, but I'm probably trading my car and the hassle of parking so that I can stay on my phone and take a streetcar 2 miles down the road. What are you seeing from a generational standpoint, both in your travels and then as you just think about development in real estate and places where you've lived, uh, with the adoption of things like streetcars that are connected to bike networks and these efficient transit systems for that short and mid-length travel?
I am a very unique case for this question because I think anyway, so I think I have a little bit of trauma when it comes to driving.
You,
So yeah.
you can't go on the 405 more than once and not have the trauma of trying to traverse five
No, no,
miles in 5 hours.
I didn't even make it past that point, right? I haven't even driven since high school. The only reason I still have my driver's license is because I still, not to brag, but I still get carded at bars. So I
Nice,
still have
very
my
good.
license. But I dread driving. The first time that my mom took me driving, I actually drove into a tree. So anyway, so I've been trying to avoid driving for as long as possible. And when I was living in Long Beach, where my first job was, I had a commute between my apartment to the office, and that was about a 40-minute walk, right? So a little bit too long for walking. It's technically doable, but just, on some days you want to go to a gym before work and you just can't be bothered to walk. So first, I got a hoverboard. um, I fell and face planted, so that's within the first 10 minutes. Did not work out. I thought
Yeah.
of getting a bike, but I also was scared of riding a bike for some reason. And also, a bike you have to carry around, you have to park it around and whatnot. So it's a little tricky. Whereas if you have Lime scooters, it's easier because you can just park it wherever, right? So eventually, what I figured out actually worked for me was just taking the bus, right? And Long Beach had a fantastic bus system where it was very safe, and I just took the bus. But I was the exception. I was the odd one. I was the one who were asked by my coworkers, how come I just, I don't just get a car? And I was looking at it, I was on my analyst salary, and I was thinking, well, I can save $2,000 a month, or I can get a car. Of course, I'm going to save money,
Yeah.
right? So I did that, and that was great. And I think the trend that happened after that, that we haven't accounted for, is now people don't have to go to the office for 5 days a week, right? So for me, for example, now I work remotely all the time. I sometimes don't even leave the house. So, how do I justify now going from having to transport 5 days a week into 3 days a week and perhaps even less, right? So, I think it depends on where you live. If I can live somewhere that is more well connected, of course I would love that. And I would pay more rent to be closer to the city center.
Yeah, it's interesting because as I think about, so before my last job, I lived in Dallas before I moved to St. Louis, and I would take the bus 4 miles down the road, but
Yeah.
it was by the time with the infrequency of the bus line, and by the time I waited at the bus stop, and by the time I had to go there and manage my schedule, um, it was as painful, although less costly, as driving those 4 miles in traffic. Although I didn't have to do anything, I just got on the
Right.
bus. But I think there's almost a catch 22 where if you don't have the to your point about rich cities, if you don't spend the cost to have the frequency and ease of using the public transit,
Yeah.
and you're kind of optimizing, right? This is a very irrational proposition. If you're just optimizing for peak times, you will tend to get more activity during those peak times, which makes it sometimes, depending on the use case, less useful, where people
Yeah.
just say, there's too much friction, I'm just going to buy a car, or I'll do something else. And then which is a downward spiral, right? Which is then we don't have as many riders as we want. It makes it more difficult. And so I am curious, increasingly curious, because the all we heard about for the last 5 years is that Gen Z is not getting driver's license. They're not experiencing this seminal moment of getting their driver's license and their
Yeah.
first car, and the this very 1950s American, the car is freedom.
Yeah.
And I'm wondering if that will change, especially now that the cost of an average vehicle is so much higher. We're in this sort of shift, and I think what I see is a lot of the cities. So St. Louis, as an example,
Mhm.
they want to build heavy infrastructure, light rail, rather than streetcars. And
Yeah.
there's this kind of institutional and generational friction between what constitutes mass transit and what actually serves the needs of the people who are there versus what is our urban planning uh dialectical standard tell us we should be doing.
Yeah. That's a really good point. So let me answer the Gen Z question first, right? So for background, I am a cusp millennial.
Ooh.
You know what that means? So cusp millennial is one, the younger side of millennials, but the older side of Gen Zs. Gen Zs think I'm a millennial, and millennials think I'm a Gen Z. So it's this awkward space where I don't really belong to either. And I think the two biggest demographic shifts that we have to note is that number one, we're not buying houses in suburbs just because it's too unaffordable, right? So if people aren't buying houses in suburb, naturally they will gravitate more towards living in a city center and then just sharing flats with their roommates or friends. The second trend is people aren't getting married, right?
Yeah.
So if I'm not getting married and having kids, I am better off living in a city center with my friends where I can see my friends all the time in a smaller apartment, but then my life is going to be interesting and I can go to restaurants, I can go to bars, and I can do all these different things and enjoy my freedom. Why would I want to live in a suburb and have more space if I don't have a family? Right? So I think two of these things are not just behavioral or psychological, but it's a cultural phenomenon that has deep economic roots to why they're taking place.
Yeah, that this actually is maybe a more of a meta discussion about real estate development and technology. And I have been a very strong proponent that we are missing the mark on this demographic decline and the cause of both family formation, birth rates, and buying houses. I think we're reading the tea leaves wrong in this situation. Tell me how this lands for you. So my thesis is that, which is actually not novel. This is fairly true, right? So in times of economic distress,
Mhm.
people tend not to spend. They tend not to extend themselves. They tend not to have kids or take on things that are either a literal liability like a car loan or
Mhm.
a hypothetical liability like a child. And if I am not secure in my work and my economic certainty, I don't know that I can take care of this child. And obviously we're not all on the farm, and so it's a liability, not labor. And so what I think, I think cities like Dallas and cities like Miami that are
Mhm.
growing like exponentially, or even Austin, where Dallas and Austin are having baby booms. It reflects two very fundamental things. One is there is growth and there is development and there is opportunity that you can see with your own eyes around you, right? When you
Mm.
when you see people around you building new houses, building new companies, new towers going up, new
Yeah.
businesses moving in, you inherently recognize that good times are upon us. I feel confident that this trajectory, that the bottom will not just fall out.
Mhm.
Conversely, in most of the other American cities, you have one of two things happening. You
Yeah.
either have the bottom has fallen out and it has not stopped for 40 years. And so people are increasingly more hesitant to be in somewhere like a Cincinnati, Cleveland,
Mm.
Memphis, or places like that where I don't know if my job will be here because it may pick up and leave. Or you have the opposite, which would be living in Los Angeles or New York or Boston, where it's just so prohibitively expensive because they've
Yeah.
become an increasingly global marketplace that how on earth could I even hope to afford living here unless I have a trust fund? Which there's some fun articles about New York about that. Um, and so I think the greatest opportunity, especially for tier two, tier three cities, is
Mhm.
to retool their system that tells a story of upward economic mobility, that
Mhm.
tells a story of economic stability, and that actually delivers on that promise in ways that we know how to do. I think then you get all of the things you've discussed and more that come with it because
Yeah.
there's, if you think about Gen Z or, cuss millennials or Gen Zs, there's a decade of pent up demand for like life markers that are going unmet because of that economic uncertainty. And I can speak to that. I am a geriatric millennial. I'm a child of the global financial crisis. I'm uh, old enough to remember before the internet when we used to get discs of AOL online minutes. Um, and that transition from 3G to iPhones. Um, but how does that sit with you? What do you think? And is that do you think that holds true around the world as well? Maybe in a different context.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think to begin with, right, we can't generalize generations. There's always subsegments of every generation that behaves completely differently, right? So the millennial that we're talking about, or the Gen Zs recently that I just talked about, is one group of the people. But there's also other Gen Zs or millennial that go, I'm gonna get married, I'm gonna have kids, and I want to have the life that my parents had and just be simple. I don't want to be in Miami. I don't want to be an influencer. I don't want to start
Yeah.
my own startup and make it big. And I just want to, if I work remotely, that's great. And maybe I'll move back home to Cincinnati or anywhere else and just have a chill life. And that's okay. Right. And I know a lot of people need that and want that as well. So I think it makes perfect sense to be able to offer that dream and adult milestone to people in this generation, because look, everyone wants different things. You just got to be able to find the right people to target. um, there was another thought that I had about, I think, Gen Z's and millennials in particular, is we make some of these decisions in part because of economic forces. So, for example, the wage haven't been keeping up with the rise of home prices, and of course, the interest rates have been not friendly, to say the least. But there's also social factors as well, right? So social factors in a sense that, for example, women have found it harder to find guys that they want to settle down with, because now they can earn their money, they have the independence, they're enjoying life, there's less societal pressure for them to have to form families. Their bars are just higher now, right? So you have all these different factors that are playing in everyone's decisions, that if you're going in purely from a governmental perspective and saying, look, here's an economic incentive, you want it, go do this, go buy a house, go get married, it's not going to work, right? Because there's a societal and social component to it as well, and let's not forget the context.
Yeah, that's a great point. And as you're saying that too, it reminds me uh, when we talk about like particularly downtown and like urban development,
Yeah.
people in the space and I think even generationally, there's an idea of the experience economy,
Mhm.
and that's the way to bring people in. And in fact, the author of that book has kind of updated it in the last couple of years. And so what we're seeing now, and I think this reflects what you talked about, is the transformation economy.
Mm.
And the idea of that is not so much gurus and events and things like that. It really comes down to who will you become by being in this place. And
Mm.
so to your point, if it's I just want to relax and chill and do, I want to get married young, I want to have the
Yeah.
house, I want to work remote. That's it. I don't need all the flashy stuff. Um, the important part is for wherever the place that thinks that's their customer to
Mhm.
deliver that and
Yeah.
to tell people that if you come here, you can become that.
Yeah.
And I always use the example, Los Angeles might be the original of this. Is in the 1980s, if you who what's the story? It's the farm boy from Iowa who picks up who sells everything, picks up and goes to Hollywood to make it in the movies.
It's still
That is
true.
that is the quintessential transformation economy. Who
Yeah.
will I become by being here? Now the reality might be different, but the story is the same, right? I have to be in
Mhm.
that place to do it. Um, and I think even more so, what you are seeing is that is becoming more internationalized
Mhm.
than pre-COVID. I think one of the things I really admire, I think it's sort of a forced attribute of Gen Z is that their minds are so much more open to
Mhm.
fine, I'll move to abroad. I'll do mini retirements at 25. I don't need all of this every single day, day in, day out to maybe take a
Yeah.
trip when I'm 50. And I think that has disrupted a lot of the ways people think about
Mhm.
development and cities and generations and housing and everything else. And so I guess the question that I come out of that is, do you think as you travel the world, do you think we're building cities for uh, the generation gone by, or do you think that we're doing a good job of thinking about building cities for the generation that's on its way?
I think both, right? There's of course cases of both, and I think you bring up a really good point is that people are become more conscious about what they can access and importantly what they're missing out on. And that's
Mm.
because of social media, right? So I could go and if I wanted to be in a startup, I would probably go to San Francisco and do all these things. And before, if you're from the middle of US, you wouldn't know what that's like to be in San Francisco. But now there's YouTube, now there's Instagram. You can go and peek inside a product manager's life and figure out what they eat for lunch and what they wear and how they talk and what are the places they hang out in. And it's crazy now because all these different experiences across the world are accessible now. And places like Croatia that I noticed, right? Croatia was not known to the majority of the US travelers until what, 2 years ago, five years ago? And now everyone's going to Croatia. And then now I've also noticed I'm currently in Spain, right? A bunch of people are moving to Spain on the digital nomad visa. So the important thing that I want to take away from this is I've been to a lot of places and when it came to deciding where I want to live, it is exactly what you talked about, right? It's about who do I want to become and which place do I feel like I am the best version of myself,
Oh, yeah.
right? Because it's not just about is it affordable? And the thing is, people do all these pros and cons lists and cost of living calculations when they first start out. But after having met so many travelers, what they usually say is, I never thought I liked this place, but then I came to this place, I fell in love with it. And it feels like a flow with the place, right? It's a synchronization, and it's just so. This is how I feel when I'm in London. Is everything just comes so easily? Like I feel comfortable. I don't have to be anyone else. I just fit in. Everyone is walking at the same speed that I like to walk. People are, you know, they like the same things that I enjoy, and everything's just easy. It's like finding the
Yeah.
love of your life, right? It's just everything's easy. I don't have to try. I don't have to do anything. I'm just here. So then the question now is, look, if you have all these different cities and they're all trying to brand themselves into something, then it's really about, okay, how do I understand myself well enough that I'm attracting somebody who appreciates me for who I am? And I think that's it.
Yeah, and I think even so, I have two things going to my mind as you're saying that. Is I'm thinking of so Scott Galloway
Yeah.
has a lot of commentary on a lot of things going on, but one of the things he's very clear on is the most important decision you will make in your life, above and before anything else, is the city you choose to live in.
Yes.
And he has his disparaging comment is, I'd rather be mediocre in New York than a superstar in St. Louis, but it's true. And what he's leaning on there is
Yeah.
there is a hierarchy of prestige and experience in these cities
Mm,
that one has outcomes, and then to your point, if you want to be an international superstar, you've got to go somewhere like New York. You can't do that necessarily outside of being an influencer, right? From a small town in the Midwest. And I think this is so critical to your point, which is not everybody wants to be an international superstar.
Yeah,
And not everybody knew that, before Instagram really, not everybody knew that there were digital nomad opportunities in Spain, right?
yeah,
We've all sort of now the seal is broken on the international opportunities outside of even a corporate relocation, which may have been the sort of Gen X to baby boomer perspective of how you might work abroad.
yeah,
And I think this has been wholly disruptive even to the way we conceptualize marketing places, marketing cities, civic branding. And I think there's a lot of places that are successful in recognizing that. But yeah, I think the way you described it as I am in a place where I am like in flow. I am in
yeah,
sync. The people, even to, I never even thought about that, right? Are the people walking at the speed that I am walking at? Or am I constantly kind of ducking and darting? I mean,
yeah,
that is sort of a esoteric manifestation of am I comfortable here or am I out of sync? And I think
yeah.
that's really insightful both for myself thinking about where I am, but also for any developer or civic person thinking about who is our city and who is it that this place is exists for.
Yeah. I have a lot of things to say, and I also follow Scott Galloway, so I'm glad
Yeah.
you brought him up.
Say more. I'd love to be quiet and listen to you listen to
Yeah.
what you think.
By the way, I saw Scott Galloway in person, right? So he came and gave a lecture. This guy's intense, right? He was an ex-investment banker and he started his own company and then he sold it for lots of money. And then now he goes around and just bluntly states his opinions. And some people get upset, other people like it, right? So look, not everyone wants to be Scott Galloway. And so whoever tells you, oh, if you want to be top at this, you have to do this. Look, you don't have to be the top at anything, right? And I grew up in a very competitive environment where I always feel like I have to be the top. But now I'm just focused on doing what I love doing. And surprisingly, that actually makes me better at what I'm doing, right? So I think for the people who want to figure out a place where they just feel comfortable, a good tip that I've come to realize is usually I can tell by the time that you get on the plane. But you get on the plane, you scan the people, and then you can just immediately know, yep, I'm gonna love this place, or yeah, I feel out of
Ooh.
place. Yes, you
The
can
plane
tell.
test. Yeah.
The plane test.
I, I think I do that too, like at the terminal test. Like when I
Yeah.
when I go up to the terminal, I do, now that you've said it, I do subtly judge everybody else getting on the plane, and I think to myself, like is this the place I want to be going with these people, or does that plane look like they're going somewhere I'd rather be? That's such
Yeah.
a it's interesting, and I wonder how many cities have done that even informally, right? Like they get like if I went to Dallas and I looked at all the people taking a flight to St. Louis, or if I went to Chicago and I looked at all of people taking a flight to St. Louis, what might I glean from that?
Yeah.
Now that might be bad example because you can drive, but I think the analogy is true. Um, Richard, are you familiar with Richard Florida? Florida?
No, I'm not. No, I'm not.
So he wrote. He's most famous, I think, for Rise of the Creative Class, and his idea.
Mhm.
So his idea, gosh, I think it was about 20 years old now, was really focused on for cities that want to reinvigorate themselves.
Mhm.
They will benefit mostly from bringing in a creative class because what comes with a creative class are new ideas,
Mhm.
new services, new ideas,
Yeah.
arts, money, create, all of the things that kind of follow that. And one of his more recent ideas is that of the digital twin. And so what he's looking at now is he's looking at places like San Francisco and Austin,
Mhm.
Los Angeles and Nashville, New York, Miami. These are places that have immense crossover, either in migration, industry,
Mm.
or where you go to Miami and there's a lot of people from the Northeast. You go to Nashville, there's a lot of entertainment people from Los Angeles. You go to Los Angeles, there's a lot of entertainment people
Mm.
from Nashville. Um, and so his point being is that as these cities grow and we get this increasing agglomeration of industries in dense clusters, right? So the DFW metro behemoth, the Southern California metro behemoth. What is starting to happen is that the scale and size of these places are becoming gravity unto themselves that is effectively diminishing some of the smaller cities that don't have the resources to attract or otherwise.
Mhm.
Maybe more broadly, think of the impact and magnitude that a global company can have versus the local store, just
Yeah.
in buying power, attraction, marketing, and everything else. Um, what are you seeing that abroad where there is an increasing number of people perhaps that are digital nomads
Mhm.
in Barcelona from certain cities? I know Dubai is the best example of this as the kind
Yeah.
of the international example of that. But what are you seeing? And are you seeing a generation or a demographic that most closely might be attributed to?
For digital nomading, all going to a certain place.
Both or.
Oh, I mean, the classic digital nomad story is you have these, Westerners, and I'll explain the cultural context where I sit in all of this. You have the classic Westerner going to Southeast Asia and then starting their online business and exploring all of Southeast Asia, backpacking around on a very low budget travel, right? So that was what I wanted. I did my Southeast Asia trip as well, right? And I think sometimes it is good for the economy in that you bring in foreigners that have consumption powers, and that's great, fantastic, right? But there are also other cases where the government just gets so tired of the certain profile of people that they're attracting that they have to set regulations. I think it was Indonesia who had to set regulations because they wanted to attract a different type of people. Right? So I think that is really important when you're trying to do these is you should be monitoring the type of people who are coming in and the impact that they're having on the local environment, right? This is the same reason why
Mm.
Barcelona, they get so many tourists all the time. And they had to put heavy restrictions on the Airbnb because the tourism that are coming in was not doing the local economy good.
Yeah, I'm thinking also of Venice,
Yeah.
and their congestion pass. Although we were there last summer and they just didn't really care. Like it's more of a headline than I think it's
Yeah.
a really heavily enforced policy. But I hear what you're saying too, and you see that almost in I see it in a lot of smaller cities that try to glom onto this Silicon Prairie idea, where we're
Mm.
spending a lot of time and resources creating tech innovation centers and tech startups and tech incubators in places that could have maybe a niche tech industry where it maybe otherwise didn't, um, but maybe where those resources could be used better. And I think in your Barcelona example, it's the Airbnbs presumably are doing there what they're doing in a lot of other tourist places,
Mhm.
which is if I buy this as a house and I turn it into an Airbnb, it's now a commercial property and worth more. And so these in demand places that used to have the neighborhood residents have now become, two
Yeah.
and three bedroom hotels. And do we really want a city filled with hotels? Because when that tourist group leaves, there's nothing there.
Yeah.
And if we start to cater to that fleeting tourist environment, are we going to lead? Is that going to lead to malinvestment and policies that end up not serving us in the long run? And I think you see these. I think you see that tension there.
Yeah.
I don't know who's managing it the best, but I agree. I think that is a critical piece to understand. What demographic and what kind of digital nomad or tourist or customer do we want,
Mhm.
where it's almost like there's the saying, like there's no such thing as bad pizza except too much. And
Yeah.
I think we've encountered that in a lot of places where everybody was competing for everybody, And I don't know that we've quite transitioned back to almost a niche marketing, which I think is where a lot of places are really going.
I would say be very, very careful if you're positioning your city to attract transient residents,
Mm,
right? If you have transient residents, you end up like a Las Vegas. And Las Vegas has its national prestige, which is great because, it may have a downturn here or there, but eventually it would be able to bounce back because it's Las Vegas. But we notice this because in a downturn, all the people disappear. What do you have left? You don't have anything left, right? That's like saying you people always treat their homes better if they own it than if they were going into a rental property. You don't necessarily want to prioritize the people who are renters over people who would have been home buyers. You want people to feel a sense of home and belonging and community in the place that you live in. So I think cities should prioritize attracting the right type of long-term residents instead of going for the hype and attracting, startup founders or digital nomad, because that's exciting. But how are you going to compete with Silicon Valley? You're probably not, right? Because the type of
right.
people who want to be remote are the type of people who want to go around, explore, enjoy the best of every place. And there's three things that they want. I'll tell you the three things, right? I used to be a part of a large digital nomad community. Number one is good weather. So they're going to leave when the weather turns bad. Number two is good Wi Fi. And then number three is affordability. So if you can't meet one of these things, you're probably going to lose a big chunk of them.
And when you say affordability, let's put some parameters around that,
Yeah.
right? When I think affordability, I think I can live in Thailand for $1,000 a month.
Yeah.
That's affordable, not an American affordable town,
Yeah.
right? Where my rent's $1,500 and I've got to pay all the taxes and I've got to pay this and that.
Mhm.
Which leads me to the question then is, given that most of the development we see in places outside of Texas or Florida seems to be either housing for rent or apartments for rent,
Mhm.
and are we digging ourselves a, I'll call it a shallow grave of uh, creating a subclass of renters who have no affinity to these places. They don't have a long-term investment. And how do you think that looks in the future, where you have a generation that are not homeowners or long-term owners in a community, and they're simply renting? Do you think
Oh,
that the behavior of the renter continues, or do you think the mindset of the younger generation is different, such that you might have a little bit more respect for a long-term rental or otherwise?
Oh, let me clarify something. So when I say owning versus renting, it's comparing it to different cities, right? So if
Mm.
I feel like a city is my home, then I feel like I'm owning a bit of the community there. It has nothing to do with the technicalities of the lease. So
Oh, okay.
in my opinion, anyone who is willing to sign a 1 year lease is staying. So
Yeah.
if I'm going around, I'd probably do an Airbnb. I would stay somewhere between 3 to 6 months. If I'm willing to sign a 1 year lease, it's home.
So I guess so I'm more clear. So are you
Yeah.
saying that maybe the difference, and even the psychological difference, is, am I renting the community that I'm in,
Hmm.
or do I take ownership of the community that I'm in? And to use maybe the Southeast Asian example is, are we bringing digital nomads who are really just extracting the low cost of living and don't care about anything else here? Or are we bringing in people who really do care about what's going on in the community here and have some sense of ownership, even if they are moderately transient, in that they'll be here for 6 months to a year? They'll still have some ownership of leaving it better than they found it. Is that what you're
Exactly.
saying?
Exactly. So a
Mm.
really good test question for this is, if I go on a vacation right now and somebody asks me, where are you from? Do I say the city that I'm currently in? Because if
Ooh,
I
that's a
don't
great
say the
question.
city that I'm currently in, it's not home.
Yeah, that's interesting for somebody like me too, because I will generally say I'm from St. Louis, but I will occasionally, if people are
Yeah.
like, I don't know where that is, they'll say, oh, but I grew up in Los Angeles, and then they know where that is.
Yeah.
Um,
But St.
and
Louis is
so
home.
It is home. It is where I live. It is home. Um, yeah, that's a great point. So the question being, so if you were asking people, like if I was going to downtown St. Louis and I said, well, where are you from?
Yeah,
Or I guess where's home?
yeah,
And they said St. Louis, great. But if they said Chicago, but they live
yeah,
here,
yes.
yeah, that's a
Yeah,
great point. It's almost it's the local in-person version of the airplane test.
exactly, right? Because then what you're really telling people is, I'm living here, but I don't associate with here for whatever reason, right? Am I too good for being here? Have I just lived in another place disproportionately for the majority of my life and I really feel like I'm from there? For whatever reason, right? For whatever reason, they're not seeing their current place as home. And in my opinion, for the most part, there's always an intention of, is this going to be a place that I want to settle down in? And importantly, build my professional network around? Or is this just somewhere that I'm gonna chill out for a little bit?
Yeah, so from the digital nomad standpoint,
Yeah.
I think we've entered in a period of a new phenomenon where you can actually effectively be from nowhere, right?
Yeah.
I can live in Buenos Aires with a global team
Yeah.
and have a pied a terre in South America and Asia and kind of be from nowhere. Do you see that
Yeah.
as being a more common either frame of mind or lifestyle, or is that simply a manifestation of a digital reality that also doesn't exist?
You know what? I think it's a phase that a lot of people will go through at some point in their time. But I will tell you this, most people will not last more than 2 years. Many people won't last more than 6 months because being on the road and traveling all the time is like being deployed in a war, right?
Yeah.
You're constantly moving, and more importantly, you're lonely. So you have to train yourself to be hyper independent if you want to be on the road for so long, because everyone that you meet is going to be gone. And very few people can live with that.
Yeah, I see that as a really important distinction between in the United States what I describe as the open culture cities and closed culture. So,
Mhm.
growing up in Los Angeles, that is a transient city where with as a generalization, you sort of expect that people are coming and going.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like
Or very much.
in the totality of people there, the expectation is every day that I get to see you, I am lucky that you are not gone somewhere else. Whereas
I think that's true.
yeah, whereas in St. Louis, the expectation is that you're probably from here and that
Yes.
you are not going to go anywhere else.
Yeah.
I don't want to say it's taken for granted, but it's sort of expected
Yeah.
that you'll continue to be here, unless you get transferred or otherwise, right? If I picked up today and said, I'm done with this place, I need to live somewhere else, we're moving to Miami, the response would not be the same as in Los Angeles, which is good on you. Let's get
Yeah.
lunch when you come back. It
Exactly.
would really be sort of like,
What's wrong with
why
you?
what's wrong? Yeah, what's wrong with you? Like
Are you
why are
okay?
you doing this?
Is everything fine?
Yes, exactly. And I think that is true for a lot of cities. And in fact, even New York, I think you get some of that, which is it's a mix of that open and closed culture, and that's sort of and
Mhm.
I'd say it's the urban arrogance, which is, but we have everything you need right here. This is a global city. Why would you
Yeah.
ever want to live anywhere else as like a permanent decision?
Yeah, because it's never about prestige, right? Going back to the point, it's not about prestige, it's about finding yourself and finding a place that makes you feel like the best version of yourself. And who cares what other people think? Life's too short. Find a place that makes you happy.
Lillian, I think that's the place to stop right there.
Yeah. Perfect.
I think that's the takeaway of the day. It's
Yeah.
been fantastic. Let's do this again. I'd love to hear more as you kind of come out of stealth mode and you come into launch. I'd be happy. I'd love to give you some feedback and hear more about what you can tell us in the future with Proptimal.
Yeah, that'd be great. Thanks for having me. And for anyone who is watching this, which I don't know if anyone's going to watch this, but let's find out. And It's so weird because I'm still thinking, wow, are people going to listen to me talk? Which is crazy. Dave, you're a great talker. I would listen to you talk. That's not a problem.
Well, thank you.
So yeah, if anyone who's watching this wants to reach out and just chat about anything, let's connect, let's chat. Love to talk, love to share ideas. And this has been fantastic. So thank you for that.
Well, what a treat. What a delight. Lilian, Chen, thank you so much. We'll talk again soon.
Thank you so much. Talk soon and have a good one.
You're welcome.
Bye.